welcome back everyone to part 2 of this series of videos that I'm creating on how we can create this app that you are seeing on the right hand side in the simulator. It's just a case of making a request to Marvel, rendering the UI out and presenting like a master detail type situation. So the position we are currently in at the moment is we have rendered out some dummy data with collection view and the yellow cells and static text, and we've just got 20 of these cells. If you haven't watched the previous video on that finishes up getting us to this point, please check out the video that will appear at the top. That will if you follow that video through, is a bit long, it's about an hour. Hopefully this one won't be as long as that. You'll be able to get to where we are now with these yellow blocks and the static text and the customized navigation bar at the top. So with that in mind, we'll make a start on going to a Marvel endpoint and changing these yellow cells to the dynamic images that you saw in the previous the finished app that was running in the simulator at the start of this video. And these, instead of it saying Cool Comics, it'll have the name of the character. So there's a couple of little not changes, but a couple of additions that I've put into the project prior to the video starting, just to try and keep the time a bit shorter. So one of the files that I've added is this hash.swift file, and this is a function that basically allows us to generate an MD5 hash of a combination of things that we need to do as like an authentication key that we need to make when we make our request to Marvel's endpoint. You have to have this combination of a timestamps and some other keys and a hash of them all together. So I've just created this. The final project is the actual finished project that you see in when we first started the video. Is actually on my GitHub page, and I'm going to put a link to my GitHub page in the description, so please feel free to take a look at that. So I have this file. I have this private constants file, which is a combination of a public and a private key. So obviously, because it's private, you won't see the contents of that file. And there's one other one. Oh yeah, this Codeable extension I've added already, but this is actually on my GitHub page as well. I've got a repository called extensions, and it's all like little extensions that I found handy and created over time. So they're all added here again. My GitHub link will be in the description below, so please feel free to have a look at that. But we're only using one version of this. We're going to be using the decoder with URL request. So I've already copy and pasted that into here. I'll give you a quick step over of what's happening. So it's using generics. We are using the standard URLSession with our past. We're passing in a URL request into this function. We'll make the request, and hopefully we get data back, a response, and hopefully our error is nil. And then we just use the unwrap it, check the status code is between 200 and 300, or less than 300. If then there's a do try catch. We'll try to handle the decode the JSON that we get back and pass it as our type. Because we're using generics, we can pass in any sort of type of object that we're expecting, and providing that's successful, then we'll just trigger our completion handler and pass back our data set result back to a data source or wherever it's been called from. In this instance, in this video, you'll be able to see I'm actually making it from calling this function from a data source. That's the intentions. If that fails, then we'll fire an error back in the completion handler, and then the same as if we can't unwrap the data or the status code is not greater than or equal to 200 or less than 300, then we'll throw an error. Really, you could probably check for 400s and 401s and 404s, 403s, all that sort of good stuff, and handle that more gracefully. But for this video, we won't cover that. May cover that in another video, but for now we're not gonna do that. So that's kind of like the networking stuff done. I've also created a empty models folder called character, and we'll be putting all our data models will be going into that folder when we get round to doing it. So the intention is to, like I say, use that decodable request extension, make a request to the Marvel endpoint and get this format of data come back. That's kind of the intention that we're going to have. And hopefully by the end of this video we'll be in a situation where this screen here is actually populated with actual proper data rather than just the static stuff that we've got now. So with that in mind, let's get going. So we've got this class which I'd already pre-set up prior to the video called request handler, and this is how we're going to build up our request data, our request stuff to send to Marvel. So we are going to try and find the base URL, which is this, steal that from there, and we'll type out base URL equals is of type string, and we're going to put that in there, but we need to make that an HTTPS gateway.marvel.com. But let me just check the documentation to make sure that's right. So that's developer. Oh, and if you've not checked out, got your API key that I mentioned about in the previous video, I'll leave the link to the Marvel website as well. It's just a case of coming here, get key, and they'll give you a private and a public key, which I've just mentioned about in my private constants file. And we have fireworks going off, which is amazing. We have this API documentation, and it should give us, if I go to this one, sorry, interactive documentation, it should give us our base URL, which is exactly what I've put, I believe, but I will copy and paste that from there and pop it in here. It looks the same. Yeah, cool. Okay, so now we need to create a function called get characters. It doesn't take anything, but it will return us a URL request, like so. So here we can build, we can create our request. So this is going to be a combination of stuff that we need to excuse me, we need to handle. So one of the things that we need to pass in, according to Marvel's documentation, is we need to generate a timestamp. So we can do that. We can do that in here. Timestamp equals date time since. Yeah, so that's the number of seconds since 1970. Then we need to, the endpoint that we're going to use is this top one called get characters. So I'm just going to again copy and paste that into a string. So we'll call this endpoint. And that needs to be of type string. And then we can now generate our URL. So our URL will look something like base URL plus endpoint. So that will just concatenate this line 12, and then line 16 will actually get appended to that to build up one huge, or eventually huge URL, because there's a few other bits and pieces we need to add to it. So for now we can do let request equals URL request, and we're just going to use URL for now. Again, you could just the decodable the decodable extension, I can actually pass a URL in, but as we're doing it like this, we'll just pass in a request. So we need to do a URL with string, type in S, it gives a string, and we can pass in our URL. We're going to force on wrap here, because really your URL should be pretty much on the button. You shouldn't really be getting the URL wrong, because if the URL is wrong, you're never going to get any data come back. So that's all done. We're not using timestamp, so let's create a private func, and this is going to be called build query string. So the query string is the bit that will sit after characters, so you'll have like a question mark, and then you can build up the query string, and you can pass in multiple parameters. It's not the safest thing to do. You want to, like, especially if you're you don't want to be passing passwords and encrypted passwords and stuff like that in a get. You want to in a query string. So yeah, it's not the most ideal method that Marvel are using, but you know, it's what we've got to do. So we've got this build query string, takes in nothing and returns a string. In actual fact, I'm just going to move this timestamp from here into here, and we'll use it here. We're not actually going to use it we're not going to use it in our get characters function. We're going to use it in our build query string function. So here we need to do something like var query string equals I can't remember the format. Let's go back to the docs. It's in the previous page, I think. Is it this one? No, how to, general information. Yes, here you go. So this section here, where it's got params on this get request, this is what we need to pass in. So we need to pass in a timestamp, which is represented by TS. So let's do our string TS. We need a question mark there. So TS will be equal to, and this is where we're going to use our timestamp. And then we will have an and. What's the next? API key. So that is my API key equals, and I believe this is my public key. And then we need to generate a hash. So our hash is going to be a combination of the timestamp, the public key, and my private key. So rather than smashing all that together there, we're going to create another function called build hash token. It's not really a token, but we'll just call it that. And we're going to pass our timestamp in here. So this would be timestamp is of time interval, which is fundamentally a double, and we will return a string. So the hash.swift file that has that function called md5 is actually going to be used here. So we need to do something like let hash string equals boom, our timestamp, which we're passing in from the we'll eventually pass in from build query string, and that's going to be and then we're going to add public key plus private key. I think that's right. It might be the other way around. Actually, let's see if we can find out from the docs. Timestamp. Doesn't say. I've got a funny suspicion I've got that round the wrong way. I vaguely remember reading it somewhere, but we'll go with that, and then we know to, if that doesn't work, we know to toggle them. So I'm sure it'd be fine. Okay, so with that, we need to do return turn md5 hash and pass in our hashed string, and that will return. Well, it's not really hash string. We'll just call that unhashed string. And then md5 will actually hash the string for us and then return that. So now all we need to do is do this and do build hash token and pass in our timestamp, so that the two match, because that's vital that where we've got ts equals timestamp, that timestamp has to match that. If it's like slightly out, the hash will be different and it won't be accepted on the Marvel server. So now we need to build query string. I think that's all we need to do here. So we just need to return query string. And then on this point here, we can do here we can do plus build query string. So that will just give us a large combination of multiple things. So our base URL, the endpoint. So it'll give us our base URL, an endpoint, and then a combination of all that good stuff that's smashed together there. And that would be that. So that should be, for this first part, all the request stuff that we need to handle. There is an additional parameter that we can stick on here, and that's a limit. So you can actually, I think Marvel will return you 30 elements by default, but if you want to request more, you'll just do something like and limit equals 70. So and that will return you a data set of 70. But we're not doing that. We're just going to go with the default one, which I think is 40. This can be a let. Whoops. Because we're not actually changing, we're not manipulating that at all. It's just build it up and return it. Or you could even just do that and get rid of query string. Yeah, so we'll just return the raw string. Me personally, I don't like doing that. Whoops. I prefer to do that because at least you can put a breakpoint here and then read look at the query string, and it's easy to debug these sections here. So yeah, I like to just store my stuff in variables so they're easy to read. So yeah, like I say, that's all the request stuff is done. Now we can move on to our models. So the models we're going to be using are going to be, we're going to create one called base character, or character base. Yeah, we'll go with character base. Base data. So this is going to be our root model. We're going to struct, and we'll cheat copy. Oops. There, it's going to adhere to the Codeable protocol, just so that we can let Swift do all the mapping for us. And the key properties we're going to be using for this are, just look at my notes. We're going to use just the response code. So if we head on up to the top here, so we're going to let response code is of type int, and it's optional. And we'll do the data tag. So we have this here. We have data. So we're using code and data. Those are the only two attributes from the JSON we are going to use in this instance. So we're going to call this data source because it's the source of our data. And this is going to be of type, we're going to create a new file, and we're going to call this character data source. Character data source, and again, copy, struct, whoops, Codeable, done. Then we can say call this is of character type, character data source, and that's optional as well. But because we are calling our properties in our model different to what we are accepting from the server, we have to now introduce something called coding keys, and that basically says like, hey, you are sending us this, but we haven't got this in our model, so you need to bind it to what we have set in the model. So if I type this out, so you've got coding keys, whoops, we need a string and a coding key like that, and it's an enum, so you're going to say case response code, and we're going to say it's equal to code. So we're just saying that code is coming from the server, but we don't have that. We need to then bind it or match it with our response code. Whoops. Then we'll do case data source, and this is of type data. So we're just saying, we're calling our property in our model data source, but that doesn't exist on the response. We have something called data, so just map it that way. So all our errors are gone. Yep, cool. Now we can move on to our character data source. So this is basically the inside of this data content. So all we're gonna get from here is we're gonna get a list of our characters. So we're gonna call it characters, like so. And again, we don't have a model for that. So let's create our model for the characters. So if we say we are going to call this character data set, no, we just call it character. Boom. Character.swift. Again, it's a struct. Call it that. It must adhere to Codeable. Done. And we'll navigate back to here. So in our character data stores, our characters is going to be an array of character. So we'll do something like that, and it's an optional. Again, because we don't have a characters attribute coming from the server, we need to use our coding keys. Coding keys, and it's type string and coding key. Done. So we need to say characters, and it is equal to results like that. I think that's right. Yeah, cool. Okay, and that's all we need to do for that bit. Then, so that's result. Then into character. This is where all the meaty stuff happens. So we're going to have a let ID. So this is going to be our character ID. It's of type integer, and it's optional. And we're going to have a let name, and this is of type string, and it's optional. Let what else we're going to have? We can have a description. Yeah, we'll have a description, and it's type string. It's optional again. Now we're going to have a thumbnail. So as you can see here, we have this thumbnail attribute, and inside of that, which is an object, inside of that is a path and the extension to our image, our big hero image that will get populated into our yellow cell that you see here. So this is of type thumbnail, but we don't have the object for that yet, so we are going to create it, but we're not going to create it inside our character folder. We're going to because we're going to use it later. So just for you could put it in the character folder, but I'm going to create a new group called reusable models, and because we're going to use it in the same object in two different places, we are going to store it in a different group. Again, it's just a housekeeping thing. It's not you have to do it that way. It's just for simplicity. You know that, oh, it's shared across multiple places. It's a reusable model. I'll go to that group. Yeah, it's just something I like to do. So we are going to call this thumbnail, because this thumbnail we're actually going to use excuse me, we're actually going to use in on the comic book as well, the actual comic book itself. So that's a thumbnail that consists of a path and an extension. So again, we're of type struct. We call it thumbnail, and it needs to adhere to Codeable. Again, Codeable. Done. And we're going to have let path, and that's of type string, and we can't use extension because extension is already used. So we can say ext like that, and that's of type string as well. And again, because our extension, our ext doesn't match what the server is sending us, we're going to have to use the coding keys again. Coding keys, and this is not always the case. Coding keys, you can have you could have like an underscore in your attribute name. I know lots of people use separate, so is selected, they would do is underscore selected, and mobile developers or client-side developers would just want to call it is selected and use the camel case. Again, that's where the property name is named the same, but they're slightly different, so you'd use your coding keys again to overcome that issue. They're really, really cool. I remember when they brought them in, it was really cool that you could do that. I remember watching someone say, or reading someone's like, you can serialize JSON in one line. It was really good. And the fireworks are going off again. Fantastic. Hopefully that's the end of that. Anyway, so the next, we need to, where did we get to? Case, path, and then case ext equals, and do extension like so. And if we, yep, that's it, the error's gone away. So now in here we need to create our thumbnail. Is an object, it's optional, and I think that covers all of our stuff that we need for now. We may need to extend this character model to accept our comics, but that's not the end of the world. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So I think that's all of our data, the model, all the information we'll need for now. So let's move on over to our data source, which this file was set up in the previous video. So we're going to create a function called FetchData. Doesn't accept anything, doesn't take any, return anything. So here we're going to create our request. Is request handler dot get data. That base URL should really be private, so it's only accessible by the file. So just as a good housekeeping thing, yeah, I've made that private so that if we try and come here again, do that, whoops, do that, base URL doesn't exist anymore. Just had to compile it for some reason. Anyway, so JSON, now we can decode our JSON. So JSON decoder dot, and it should give us our extension. So it is, and we are expecting a character base data dot self, and then in there we pass in our request, and then here we're expecting our result and error. So that should, if we build and run, that should get rid of that error, or just build it. Yeah, it does. So one thing we need to do now is we need to create a closure that will trigger an event in our UI. So we're going to do var update, call it update UI. It's a closure, and we're going to pass in our, whoops, like that. We're going to pass in our error, and its return type is void, and it's an optional. So here we would go update UI question mark in there and pass in our error from our oh, that's going to be optional as well, from our request. So we'll just step through a fetch data one at a time. So we declare our function here, we create a line 16, this one here, whoops, this one here. We are building our request, so that's our get characters request, and then lines 17 to 19 we are doing a using our extension, our JSON decoder extension, and making a request and saying we are expecting a data set back of type character-based data, and that should return us a result of that data, of character-based data. And then this update UI closure is just basically saying, right, we've got data, we've waited, we've got data back from the server. Let's go and update and reload our collection view. That's pretty much what it's saying. Now we need to go into our presentation layer, which we are now in, and then data. We're going to do data source dot and call our fetch data, and then data source dot update UI and trigger our closure. So here we need to do weak self, and then we can do here we should get an error, and then do in, and that looks good. So then if let weak self equals self, and then do weak self dot collection view dot reload data. But we could also check that if error is equal to nil, then reload the data. So we'll step through this bit of code line by line. So yes, that's it. So line 41, we're just saying we need to trigger our closure, or start listening for our closure, and then we're doing the weak self just in case there's some sort of retain cycle, so that will just stop that from happening. And we're expecting an error, so if that's an optional. So in an ideal successful situation, that error should be nil. So we'll check. You could actually fix that by going like that and then get rid of that if, and you use some form of like chaining, and that will basically check to see if the error is nil. If it is nil, then we've had a successful result from the server, and we'll reload the data. And I think that will pretty much do for now. So what I'll do is I'll set a excuse me, I'll trigger a print statement and say, yay, we got data and we reloaded the table view. Nothing's going to happen. It's not table view, is it? It's collection view. Nothing's going to happen. We're still going to see the yellow squares, and we're still going to see the static test, because we're not actually setting the data in the data source to the cell, and we're not returning the correct the row count or the cell count back. But we just want to make sure that this print statement gets triggered. So we'll run the code, and fingers crossed, we should see print in the console. We should see print. Oh yes, one minor mistake I forgot to do is this, and basically the reason it's flagging this is because the URLSession stuff that's used in the decodable extension that I've created actually is done on a background thread. So to reload the data, we now have to move to the main thread, and to any UI work has to be done on the main thread, unless you're using something like a framework called Texture, which I'm going to do a video tutorial on. It's an amazing framework. It's a good it's not a replacement for swiftui, but you can certainly use it if you're having to support older devices, which is something I touched on the previous video. You can use texture as a great tool, and if you need to support, if you want a swiftui type style of declarative UI, but you want to support older devices, I strongly advise you to look at texture. It's a great framework. Anyway, I digress. So we're going dispatch queue main async, and that's basically saying, right, okay, reload the collection view on the main thread. Pop that in there. Now that hideous purple bar will skedaddle. Yay! As you can see there, yay! Our print statement triggered. Yay! We got data and we reloaded the collection view. But like I said, we are still expecting the yellow cells because we're not actually physically setting the data in the data source. So let's move over to that and do that now. So where we're returning 20, we do know the amount of data that we're going to get back from the server. So with that in mind, we need to create an accessible. We need to set some sort of variable to access our character-based data object outside of FetchData. So we're gonna do call it character data source, and it's an optional like that, and then before we update the UI, we'll set it here. So we'll do self dot character data source equals result. So that's just going to bind our result set we get from the server to our variable that we've just created, and then down here we can do something like character data source dot characters dot count, and because this is optional, we need to provide a default value, so we'll just do a double question mark 0, and that is looking good. So that will return us the amount of cells based on the default value that Marvel set for the amount of characters they'll return, which I think is 40. I think it's 40, but you can override that by using the limit parameter, which I showed earlier on in the video. Then down here in our hero collection view cell, our custom cell, which is currently a yellow box with cool comics as static text, we are going to create a function called setData, and it's going to take in a object of type character. Yeah, character, we'll go with that. Character, optional. Yeah, make it optional. So here we can do hero name title dot text is equal to character dot name, like so. Then we'll leave it at that for now. We'll build and run it, and then there's a few extra steps we need to do to get that image to work, but we're going to use a third-party library, so we'll do this bit first and then we'll move on to the image stuff. So now we can call our cell dot set. No, it hasn't picked it up yet, so we'll just build it. Cell dot set data. There you go. So we're expecting a character object, so we need to extract the characters, a single character from our characters array. So we'll call this character, and this will be equal to, and then we can just kind of cheat a little bit and copy and paste into there. It's an optional, and then we'll use square brackets because it's an array, and we'll say we need the index path dot item. So in our number of items in section, so line 28, we're returning a count of the number of characters that we have in that particular array. So to extract that information out, we look in the array, but this square brackets actually says I want index blah, and it will return us whatever character is based at that index. So if we go back to our comic book app and we look at this first one, so the array is 0 index, so this will be index 0, 1, 2, 3, and so forth, and that's what index path dot item will be. It will be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to the max count that we receive from the server. So on line 33, now we have our character extracted from the array. We can just pass that in to our set data, and that's that. And if we build and run, we should, in theory, see no longer call comics. We should get our character names. There you go. Look at that. Perfect. So we have our character names appearing at the bottom of our collection view cell, which is cool. So now on to the image. Back to our collection view. And we are also going, like I said, we're going to use a third-party library. So if we go into here and then type in SDWebImage. Now, SDWebImage is an amazing library. It's been around for a very, very long time. And if you're getting images from a URL, this is just the perfect tool. You could easily write your own, but this handles like loads of stuff for you. Like if the URL fails for whatever reason, the URL is badly formatted or whatever, you can actually put a placeholder in, and it works really, really well. It's a great library. Move away from that. So we're going to use the Swift package manager that comes already rolled into xcode 11, and I love this. Is amazing. I love this. So we're going to go SDWebImage. Okay. I've already downloaded it. I didn't know that. But anyway, normally you would go to add dependency, and it will take you to the. It will just automatically download it for you. But I've already done that. I don't know when I did that, but anyway, that's that. So SDWebImage is now in. So if we go to the bottom, we need to say hero. So we're back in our collection view, our custom collection view cell. We go to hero image dot, and then we have. First of all, we need to import SDWebImage. Import SD. Why is it not picking it up? SDWebImage. No module found. Right. So back to where we left off. Sorry about that. I had to just shut xcode down and open it up again. Mental. Anyway, .SDWebImage. So we'll do passing that. Now this is expecting a URL, so we already have the path, so it will be a combination of the path and the extension. So we can do something like guard let path equals character dot thumbnail dot path. Then we also need to get the extension, so we'll call this let ext equals character dot thumbnail dot ext. So that will, and then we'll do else curly braces return. Then that will give us our unwrapped path and extension. Then we can just build up the URL saying let URL path plus, and because there's no dot, we have to append that, we have to put the dot in the middle and then plus ext. So that'll give us our full URL. Yeah, that will give us our full URL. Then we can do URL string and then pass in our URL. We won't have a placeholder image. Options will be from loader only, and we won't have any, I won't have pass in the dictionary at the end. So that should be that, and I think we have to force unwrap that. So if we build that, everything should work. Cool, build succeeded. So if we run that, we still won't see any images, but in the console down here you'll see a whole bunch of errors, and we'll go over that as to why we see that shortly. And this is going to take a while to load boot up, because there you go, all these hideous errors that we see. And the reason is because the URL that they are providing, i.e. this one here, we'll copy and paste this one, is actually HTTP, and because of the whole TLS rules, the transport layer security stuff, Apple or Xcode really only allows you to communicate. So that's our image that we are expecting from that URL. Apple and Xcode expects you to communicate using HTTPS. There is a way around that, and if I pull up my notepad, we have it here. So it's just a case of copy, and then in our info.plist, we will look view open as source code, and if we scroll to a good point, preferably here, we'll paste that in, but then if we go back, we probably need to remove that one because we're not using that. But then if we go back to our plist in a more user-friendly mode, like so, I will go through what we've just basically added. It's just a block of XML that we've added. Fundamentally it's XML, and it's this app transport security settings, and then inside of that we're basically saying to Xcode that yeah, we trust this, we know it's not HTTPS, we're explicitly saying that we are happy for our app to communicate with this endpoint. So there's two Boolean values in here that we have set to yes or true, so that we say anything that's a subdomain of i.anyhill.us, anything that's a subdomain of that, and any third-party exception, we're happy with that as well. So basically anything linked to that URL with the subdomains or any third parties, we're happy to accept data or make communications with that endpoint. Now, if we build and run, we shouldn't see the yellow boxes, we should see some nice images. Like that. Perfect. So, and as you can see, because of that SDWebImage library that we're using, we're actually like putting them in when we need them, and then if we scroll back, they are kind of semi-cached. They're cached, you know. So scrolling backwards and forwards, they get cached. So just to tidy up, if we go to the home collection view cell, and we get rid of that yellow background and build and run, now we'll just see a white collection view cell, or in this instance it'll look clear until we get our data populated. So there you go. And that is, other than the drop shadows around the cells, the edge of the cells, and the drop shadow that's in the title of comic, that's where it says comic characters, that view is pretty much done, other than the animated spring press that we get, which we can build in the next video. So if you look at the finished article, we have a drop shadow around the outside of the collection view cell, and we also have a drop shadow on the title that says comic characters. We can do we can look at that in the next video. The main intention in the next video is to work on this this detail view, so have that start rendering out the UI on this section. But that's pretty much it for today's video. It's been another long one, but we've covered a lot, and yeah, please check out the first video and give us some feedback. Like I said in the previous video, I'm completely new to YouTube, never done this. I'm finding it interesting to try and talk and code at the same time. It's something I've never done. Yeah, it's actually quite difficult. So all the YouTubers out there that are coders and talk at the same time, yeah, hats off to you. Yes. So yeah, that's it from me. But if you've liked the video, please give us a like or dislike. Even if you haven't liked it, please, all structured criticism is welcome. And like I say, if you liked it, give us a like. If you've really liked it and it hasn't been much of a car crash, or you haven't thought it hasn't been much of a car crash, then please subscribe to the channel, because it makes me think that I'm actually doing something helpful. And most importantly to me, I'm hoping that you're getting value from this with your hopefully people new to Swift and Xcode and Apple and are getting some form of value, because that's the long-term goal for me, is just provide value to people. I don't care about anything else. I just want to help people learn. So yeah, give us a thumbs up, give us a like, give us a thumbs down if you didn't like it. Leave a comment as well. I try and get back to people if I can. But yeah, hopefully I'll see you on the next one, and thank you very much for watching.